All right. Good morning. Thank you, George. That was beautiful. And I love that. Isn't that like the world? It says, no, don't use that word. That's the wrong word. Unbreak. And we're here to break through all that stuff that says you can't do it. I love it. That's what Reverend Mary talked about in the prayers. The purpose of our center, the purpose of us being here is to break through, is to move forward from where we have been. I love that. Thank you. That just bang on. Spot on. So why the yellow hat? Reverend Mary says, I listened to this before. I know I was wearing that stupid yellow hat. I have an addiction. I have to confess, I have an addiction. Some of you may not know this. Some of you do. Some of you know my one addiction. It's chocolate. Some of you know another addiction because I've used in this talks a few times, and that's being right. Right? My third addiction is the Tour de France. It's a bicycle race, for those of you who don't know what that is. 3 weeks long, and today's the last day. And I've been very quiet about it this year. I haven't really talked about it. Sometimes I've included it in previous talks in previous churches. Usually it just kind of glazes people's eyes over. And somebody said, isn't that just watching a bunch of guys ride their bicycles? I went, yeah. What do? Watch a bunch of guys drive their cars or stand out in the outfield hustling their, private parts as, a couple of guys play catch from a little mound of dirt and, But I happen to love the Tour de France. Today was the last day. One of the American riders who was there for the first time was interviewed, and they asked him what I thought was a really beautiful question. That was, what have you learned about yourself in these 3 weeks? Isn't that a great question? Ralph Waldo Emerson I was told that this question he used to ask people was, what have you learned since last we met? What have you learned since last we met? Isn't that a great question? Rather than, how are you? What do you think of the weather? How's that job? What have you learned since last we met? And it's a powerful question. And he said, what I've learned is that my body can be broken and I can pick it up and keep going. It can be broken again and I can pick it up and keep going as long as I go for it. Which just happens to be the title of today's talk. Go for it. And so it's that learning. How many of us have had our bodies or our spirits or our hearts or some aspect of ourselves broken or feel broken, and yet we get up and keep going for it? And we keep going for it, right? Okay, good. Most of us have had that broken experience. My encouragement is that you keep going for it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Today's going to be a pep rally on going for it. We're going to... No, it's not. We're going to start off with a wonderful quote from Goethe, the great German philosopher, who said, whatever you can do or dream you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. And those are beautiful words, aren't they? Beautiful inspiration. And yet most of us have had an experience there. Our talks this whole year come out of the Joyous Living Journal, which is in the bookstore. If you don't have a copy, this is a fabulous book to work with on a daily basis. It has individual daily meditations and guidelines. So, and the one for this week is on going for it. And they talk in the second half of today's reading. The beginning of any undertaking may be exposing you to criticism from others. Your belief in what you see must be stronger than the doubters before you, and I would add stronger than the doubters within you. Your belief in what you see must be stronger than the doubters. Your creative expression wants to expand, yet when it meets with resistance, the emotionally immature custodian of the vision finds it's easier to contract to where it is safe. If you choose the comfort of approval, the boldness you once had softens. The early strength gives way to safety, and the once clear voice becomes a distant memory. And some of us have had that experience, haven't we? Or we've known maybe somebody, we've got a second cousin somewhere over a ways away that has had that experience, and we've watched them have it, right? So we're going to talk about not so much a pep rally of go for it, but about what gets in the way of going for it. Because our natural tendency is to go for it. Our natural tendency is to organize our talk from front to back instead of back to front. Maybe I should just begin at the end and go to the beginning. That'd be a fun thing to do. But our natural tendency, if when we're clear, is we do go for it. We allow the opening of spirit to move through us. Yes? Yes. Okay. Emerson said we are inlets and we may become outlets to the divine. We naturally are inlets. We just are. We don't have to do anything. This is our second step of treatment. I am one with that. I am one with the infinite. But the question is, do we let ourselves become outlets for the divine? We are inlets and we are inlets and we may become outlets for the divine. We have that choice. And so today we're going to talk about how to become more effective outlets for the divine. So when we look at what holds us back, the first thing is comfort. See, for me, it's much more comfortable to sit on my couch and watch those guys bicycle through France than it is for me to get out on my bicycle. As one of my teachers once said, you can't get muscles watching me lift weights. But we stay with the comfort. We stay with what's comfortable. We don't want to break out of our little comfortable routine. And so we let our vision go because we want to be comfortable. We hold ourselves back because we're afraid of criticism. We're afraid that we'll be kicked out of the tribe. We're afraid that somebody will go, who do you think you are? You're doing that wrong. You shouldn't be wearing that hat. Don't you know that ministers never wear yellow hats that say a bank name on them when you're... This is, by the way, the official Tour de France fan hat. It was given to me by a minister friend who was in France for the Tour de France a couple of years ago. I'm official. And the third thing we go for is safety or approval. We want to play it safe. We want to fit in. We want to stay where we are. So we're going to look today not so much about how to go for it, but how to unravel the parts of us that don't want to go for it. Does that sound good? Yes. Okay. It's a little painful. The first service, I had to kind of keep reminding him to breathe. But we got to a good place at the end of it, right? Yeah, I think Peggy is here somewhere, and I know when she said she walked into the building, she could feel the energy going. So let's see what we can do if we can get that stuff out of the way, what it will release. So I'm going to be using some ideas from Gay Hendricks' book called The Big Leap, which is a fabulous book, by the way. Hopefully we have it in the bookstore, and if not, we'll get it in the bookstore. And he talks about that we all have what he calls an upper limit problem, or an OP. You and I have an OP. Okay? And the upper limit problem is this. He compares it to a thermostat. The good that I can experience in my life can't get too high and can't get too low. It has to stay within this nice, comfortable zone. You know, Reverend Mary was asking me about the air conditioning. You know, the first service it was set a little high or something like that, and I came off of the podium just a pile of sweat, you know. And then we were setting it a little bit lower, and she goes, well, maybe we should set it even lower still. It's like, what's our comfort zone? You know, most of us don't like the air conditioning when it's set at 32, right? But we also don't like it when it's set at 132. Okay? We have a comfort zone. We operate within that comfort zone. And when we're doing something, when we're trying to manifest the vision in our lives, we go for that comfort zone. We try and stay within that comfort zone. If we get too far below what is comfortable for us, we will adjust upwards. If we get too high above what's comfortable for us, we will adjust downwards. Some of you breathe. Have known people like that, right? Yeah. I'm not asking if you've done that. I'm just saying that you know people like that. Our thermostats are set, guess when? Early childhood. Before we have time to think about it, before we have time, we don't consciously choose our thermostat. Usually we're told what our thermostat will be by our parents, our siblings, and our teachers, and the kids around us in early school. Very early in our childhood, oftentimes before we can think about it, is when the thermostat is set. And we get to deal with that. So if it gets too good, we allow guilt to pull us back. I've heard the story that you can take a bunch of crabs and set them in a low pot, live crabs, and set them in a low pot where any of them could easily get out. But if one of them starts to get out, the others will pull it back. And that's how our guilt is. That's how our voices within are. That's sometimes how our friends are. You know, if you get too successful, who do you think you are? Don't leave us, come back. We're going to pull you back in. It's very important to have friends with you who are also growing. You know, that's their part that Reverend Mary put in the prayers. We are a community of people who are committed to grow and move past where it's comfortable. Take a breath. So we're going to start to look at a little bit of the upper limit problem and how we do that. When we hit these problems, what we have is what's called a cognitive dissonance, which means that two facts are trying to exist in the same space at the same time, which, as you know from Newtonian physics, can't happen. We'll discuss quantum physics another time, but Newtonian physics, two facts. So here's one fact. Rich people are evil or bad. Number two, I want to be rich. Women or men are, you fill in the blank, but I want a loving relationship. And these are dissonant facts, and that blank, by the way, was not a good blank for many of us. Okay? When we have those cognitive dissonances, we have to do one of two things. Either bring ourselves back into alignment with the belief, or blow up the belief. And I'm here to encourage us today to... You got it. That's the going for it we're going to do today. So we're going to go for blowing up the belief. So let's take a look at what's holding us back and holding us from keeping us from going for it. The first one is a belief that says that I am fundamentally flawed, that there is something wrong with me, that I've done something in my life for which I cannot ever be forgiven. I'm not going to ask you to stick your hands up, but some of you are working with this paradigm deep down underneath in your life. In foundations class, and probably I'm not sure what Science Mind 100 is like, but we take a look at something called core beliefs. And this is the kind of when you really drill down underneath. This is what, if you work with a practitioner or a minister in counseling, this is what we usually try to do, is support you and ourselves in getting to that core belief. What's really operating underneath all that other stuff that is continuing to manifest in your life. And you can do all sorts of wonderful things, but if you have this little core belief that says, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I've done something wrong, it's going to sabotage everything you do every single time. Some of you can relate to this? Yeah. So the first one is, something's wrong with me, and I've done something unforgivable, and so therefore I'm never going to let myself succeed because there's something wrong with me. And the more I succeed, the more you all will see that there's something wrong with me. And so I don't want to expose that. And so I will tend to, if I have this belief, play small, hold myself back, not try and succeed on any kind of a large scale because I'm too visible, you'll see me, and also because if I really go for what I really want, if I really go for what's really in my heart, well, if what's really in my heart, but I'm wrong, guess what's in my heart? Wrong. And so I don't want to go for that, because if I go for it and fail, I will have gone for my biggest dream and I will fail to get it, and I will really prove that there's something wrong with me. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's one of the beliefs that many of us are operating with, and it's very common, very, very common. I used to be a rebirther and prior to being a practitioner, and in both rebirthing and in practitioner, we work with those core beliefs, and there are so many people that are working on the planet with this belief that I am wrong, something's wrong with me, I've done something wrong. So take a breath. This is yours. We're just going to let it go. We're going to dissolve it. It's not the truth. The number two thing we work with, there's four of these in all. Number two is something called disloyalty and abandonment. If I get too successful, if my life gets too good, if I feel too happy, I'm going to betray and leave behind all my friends. My parents or my siblings, my friends won't approve, and I'm going to be left alone. If I make too much money, nobody, all my current friends, they won't come drinking with me, or they won't come partying with me, or they won't, hang out with me anymore, and I'll be left alone. I'll be disloyal to the paradigms, the normal. My parents only made this much money, so therefore I shall not make more than that. There's a whole psychology around that. There's a whole group of people that will not make more than their parents made. They will not have a better relationship than their parents had. They will not have greater health than their parents had. Because that's our model, and in being loyal to our parents and being loyal to these people that we love, we don't want to blow past that model, because guess what? That makes them look bad. Take a breath. Some of us are working with that model. It can be healed. It's also not the truth of us. Number 3, greater success equals greater burden. And this works in 2 ways. Number 1, many of us have a belief that I'm a burden or I'm in the way. You know, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, the safe thing to do in my house, the best thing to do in my house, the wisest thing to do in my house was be invisible. Because my parents were at war with each other, and the best thing I could do was kind of keep my head down and be invisible. So guess what? I didn't want to be in the way. And I have a whole thing that I've done in my life. I've gotten better at that. You know, obviously I'm a minister standing in front of you now, so I kind of have healed that to some degree. You know, but for a whole long period of time, I would just try and sneak around. You know, if you invited me to a party for a long time, I was the guy who was invisible sitting in a corner reading a book off your bookshelves. I would have loved Mary's house. I would have tried to stay out of the way. And so we have that idea that if I'm a burden, if I'm in the way, if I'm more successful, if I am more of who I am, I'll be more of a burden and more in the way. Gay Hendricks talks about when he wrote his first book, he has this paradigm running. His dad had died a few months before he was born, and his mom was left with $300, his older brother, and unknowingly him in her womb. Okay? And so that was kind of a stressful period. So he was not really welcomed as a child, as another burden, right? Got it? Burden. Take a breath. So he grew up. Now, his grandparents lived next door, and they loved him. They thought he was wonderful. So he had a great relationship with his grandparents. He'd just go next door and have a great relationship with his grandparents. Later on, as an adult, he writes his first book. He comes home to visit his mom and brother and drops a copy of the books for each of them. They take one look at the book and put it aside and continue with the conversation they were having with each other. Because he's a burden to them, and he continues to experience that in his own life. Take a breath, because some of you have experienced stuff like this. So that's the number 3 thing we have operating. I'm a burden, I'm in the way, and anything I do will become a greater burden or even more in the way. The other half of this is success is a burden. I have a friend who lives on a poverty level and won't make any more money because she doesn't want to pay taxes. Because that would be a burden. Okay? If I get too much money, it'll be a burden. Relationships are hard work. We've all heard this. Relationships take work, right? And if you have the relationship you really want, a fabulous relationship, it must take a lot more work. And so we hold ourselves back from the woman or man that we would really love to be with and the relationship that we would really love to be in because it might be too hard, too much of a burden. So that's the second half of that. It'll be too hard. It'll be too much of a burden. And so I'm going to hold myself back and not be my full self. And the final one is I'll outshine people I'm not supposed to outshine. Any of you who were ever encouraged to dumb down when you were young? Some of you know what I mean. You were told not to outshine your brother, your sister, your fellow classmates, whoever it was, your parents. It's awkward when your kid comes home from school and knows more than you do, right? Do we have parents in the room? Yeah. So we're taught not to outshine others because they'll look or feel bad. In other words, their feelings are more important than mine. Their ability to feel okay about themselves is more okay than my ability to be myself. And so some of you have that going on, right? Let's take a collective deep breath. So some of you have probably been touched by any one or some combination of those 4. And we'll talk about now, the good news, how we apply those 4 in our lives. And then we'll talk about how to get rid of them. So how do I apply these? How do I know when this OP is showing up in my life, my upper limit problem? Number 1, I worry. I know there's nobody here, but you've probably met people who worry. I've met people who worry. I never do. Do I worry too much? I don't know if I worry too much or not, but some people worry. And worry is actually using our visualization, our affirmation, our mind to create what we don't want in our lives. All this stuff, all the wonderful principles we teach here about visualize what you want and affirm what you want and all like that, worry is using that to create what you don't want. I'm worried about that I'm not going to be able to pay the bills. Okay, guess what? That's what I'm visualizing and seeing. I'm worried that, that I'm never going to have a wonderful relationship again. Guess what? That's what I'm worrying and seeing. Visualizing and seeing. So number one is worry. We get into worry. It's a wonderful way to avoid actually doing what we want to do because I'm too worried about it. The second thing we do is we criticize and blame. It's so much easier to point at you and say, you're doing it wrong, rather than for me to deal with that thing. You know that old phrase where, you get one, if there's a finger pointing out, you get three pointing back? Yeah. These are the people who ignore the three that are pointing back. And it's so much easier to point our fingers and blame somebody else. Look at them, look at them, look at them, look at them. Don't look at me. Okay? I've met people like this before. Maybe occasionally I've been a person like that before. So we criticize and we blame. The third one we do is something called deflecting. That's where I tell you how wonderful you are and you say, oh no, not me. You look beautiful today. Oh, this old thing? I got this at the Goodwill 25 years ago. Did a great job on that. Oh, it wasn't me, really. I had a good team to support me. Anybody relate? Yeah. So deflecting says, I'm not that good. And we're taught that oftentimes as humility. But it's a false humility. It's not accepting the gift that's been given. If I compliment you and say you did a really good job on that, it's a gift to you. Do you know what the proper response is? Thank you. Just thank you. Nothing more. And for those of you who you know that you're deflectors, that's your homework this week. In fact, for this month, next coming month. It's a short month, so we got to move it into August too. Just simply, anytime somebody gives you a compliment or says you do well, just say thank you. Nothing more, just thank you. Not, I could have done better. Not, oh, anybody could have done that. Just thank you. Okay? We're going to practice this? Good. You'll be amazed how much that'll shift your life, just that one alone. Number 4, squabbling, getting into arguments. You ever meet people who are constantly into arguments? It's a way of avoiding intimacy. There's a great scene from the movie Annie Hall, Woody Allen's Annie Hall movie, where he's running around the bedroom, his wife is in bed, and he's running around the bedroom, and he's espousing his latest theory on the Kennedy assassination at the time, and his conspiracy theory, and who actually did it, and all that stuff. And his wife finally looks at him and says, has it ever occurred to you that you're doing all this just to avoid intimacy with me? And you expect, this character to give back this wiseacre comment, and instead he just simply stops and he goes, you're right. So oftentimes we do squabbling. We get into arguments with people. I shared in the first service that, we'll sometimes set up fights because the makeup sex is so good. Could we have a good, intimate relationship without the squabbling? Would that be okay with you? Yes. Yes. So we use squabbling sometimes as a way to do it. We do this among our families. I oftentimes, in people who have had the death of a relative, a mother or father especially, the children will all get together and squabble about who gets what and where the money goes, and they'll fight with each other. And all of a sudden, this once wonderful, loving family, or even halfway loving family, will suddenly become at war with each other. And really what it is I'm not going to deal with my feelings I'm really feeling. And so I'm going to get in a fight with you instead. So squabbling is one of the other ways we do this. Another one is getting sick or getting hurt. I know nothing about this, but I've heard that there are people who when they do something like become ministers of the church, and they're going to be really, it's a beautiful, wonderful, fabulous new church, and they're just so loved and stuff like that, they'll go out and do stuff like dropping a kayak on their toe and breaking their toe. So that they're hurt or they're sick. You want to know the funny thing? The first month after I took my previous church, my right eye detached. My retina in my right eye detached. This might be one of my patterns. Oh, the shame of it. There are people who, when it really gets really good, suddenly get sick, they get hurt, they undo it all by doing that. They have a wonderful appointment, they're supposed to speak, it's supposed to be the most wonderful thing, and instead they can't make it because they're sick, or somebody else in their life gets sick. So that's number 5. And then the last one we sometimes do when we want to activate the upper limit problem, when we want to bring our temperature back down, is we do what's called an integrity breach. Suddenly we who have never stolen money in our lives steal money, or shoplift and get caught. Or we go out and get drunk and drive. Or we have an affair on our wedding night. Or the day before. We embezzle money. We've known people like that. We've read about them in the paper. Some of us know about that. And some of us do that in small ways. We do something to break through our integrity, to have an integrity breach. So these are some of the things that we do when we're in that upper limit problem, when we're trying to bring our thermostat back down. That's some of the best ways to do it. We talked about squabbling. I was sharing the first service that when I became aware a couple of years ago when I was with my previous church that as things would start going really well and I would get really happy, I'd start picking fights with my ex-wife. The ones where she's not there for the fight, right? Yeah, the ones that were happening just up here. I'd start thinking about the divorce. I'd start thinking about that stuff. Talk about bringing your temperature right back on down, okay? And so I finally had to break through that one day. I remember I was driving up to Moscow, Idaho, which is a very pretty drive up there through the rolling Palouse hillside and stuff like that. And I realized I was hammering away about my ex-wife in my mind. Okay? And I finally realized I had been feeling really good 5 minutes before that. So I just did a quick forgiveness. May you be happy, may you be at peace, may all good things come to you, may you be at peace. And then I started noticing the nature around me. I started thinking of not only the wonderful things that were happening, but I started becoming aware of more wonderful things were happening. Basically, I was aware of this temperature thing, and I said, I'm going to jam that thermostat right on up past the red line. How happy can I be today? How happy can I be today? Am I willing to let myself just go not just a little bit, but way past my red line? Are you willing to let yourself go way past your red line? Yeah, right now. So how do we get out of this junk? Number 1, we pay attention to our habitual behaviors. We pay attention. Oh gosh, last church I had my right eye fall out. This church I broke my toe. Well, it didn't fall out, but the retina. Maybe I have something going on here. Every time I get happy, I think about my ex-wife. Maybe I got a pattern going on here. Pay attention to our habitual behaviors. Pay attention, especially if you've been feeling good, what starts to happen in your life. Pay attention. Number 2, understand our family story. We all have family stories. Take a breath. And here's the trick. Lose your fascination with your family story. For most of us, our family stories stay right here in our vision or pretty close. Big, bright, centered. You know what he or she did to me. My parents did this to me. My siblings did this to me. Whatever. My ex-wife did this to me. Or ex-husband. We have that family story and we keep it front and center. You know where it belongs? Back behind us, small, dull. Carolyn Mays talks about a woman who was molested by her father once when she was young. She spent the next 40 years, every single day of her life, in some meeting or another of incest survivors. And as Carolyn said, it's like the incident took 15 minutes and she's made a career out of this for 40 years And the thing is, and it's not that you don't go deal with it, you do deal with it, but you deal with it and then you move on. Amen. So it's not that you push it under the carpet and say, no, this didn't happen, but you say, this happened and I'm going to deal with it because I am not carrying that around for the rest of my life. Yeah? Many of you know I used to be a hardcore bicyclist, and up in Seattle there were people who liked to, with their cars, play chicken with the bicyclists, just how close can I come at speed? And I used to get real upset with those people until one day I finally said, you know what? I'm out here. One person did that to me, and I found myself squabbling in my mind with a person who was already way down the road. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to let this person ruin my day. I'm out here in a beautiful countryside on a bike on a beautiful day, which in Seattle there's not that many of, not as many as here. It's the sun, the whole thing, clouds. I'm not going to let that person ruin my day. And so I started paying attention to how beautiful it was around me. So we start to pay attention to our vision. We start to pay attention to how good it is around us, and we put that old family story where it belongs, in the rearview mirror, and let it be there. Number 3, this is kind of part of what we're talking about. We do a pattern interrupt. How many of you are in Prosperity Plus? Yeah. You know what a pattern interrupt is, right? Yeah. Excuse me. I interrupt this conversation with a message from my soul. That's when the voices in our head are going, Gini, 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 Gini. It's, excuse me. I like to think of it as, for those of us who are old enough to remember vinyl records, is you take the needle and you jam it across the record so it gets us out of the groove. That same old record that's been running along and along and along and along. So we do a pattern interrupt. Do I dare say it again this time? For the first service I said, sometimes you just got to turn around to those voices and say, shut the F up. I no longer want to put up with this in my life. I've listened to you and listened to you and listened to you, and you have battered on me and tore me down. Shut up! That's called a pattern interrupt. Number 4, become more fascinated with your vision. Instead of being fascinated with your story, instead of listening to those voices, instead of being fascinated with all the failures and all the pain and all the hurt and all the wounding and all this stuff, become fascinated with your vision. Become fascinated with what you truly want to express in your life. And if you don't even know what that is, become fascinated with knowing what it is. For some of us, like that reading said, the voice has become so distant that we've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten what our vision is. So I'm willing to become fascinated with just knowing what it is. Because there's a part of each of us that knows what it is. There's a part of each of us, there's an aspect deep within us that knows fully why we came to this planet and what the magnificence is we are here to express. And we are here to express magnificence. Yes. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's the one sitting in your seat, by the way. That's the person I'm talking to. Nudge your neighbor and say, he's talking to you. And just notice that your neighbor nudged you back and said the same thing back to you, okay? Joel Goldsmith, love this quote. God is the mind of me, the life, the soul, the spirit, and God is my capacity. How's that? God is my capacity. We run around going, oh, well, I'm just a limited little so-and-so. I'm just a human being. I'm just. You're just God. That's your capacity. I have access to the infinite intelligence, to infinite eternal life. I have access to infinite supply, infinite harmony, peace, and perfection. To all of these I have because I have access to infinity. I have access to infinity. That's our second step of the spiritual mind treatment that we do. God is all there is. The infinite presence is all there is. And I am one of that. Amen. Take a breath. Breathe that in. Fully embody that. Let that ripple through your mind. Let that ripple through your body. Let that ripple through every cell. I am one of that. My capacity is God. So you may or may not know the vision that you want to have right now, but you have one. At the very least, you can ask yourself the question, am I willing to feel better now?
Yes.
Am I willing to feel better now? Yes. Great. So your homework this week is to feel better. First, become aware of how you sabotage your joy. Pay attention. When it starts going well, just notice the thoughts that come into your mind. You're going to walk out of here today, some of you. You'll walk to your cars feeling really good, and something will start to go off in your mind. Be aware of it. Don't beat yourself up. Put the mallets away. No hammers, no whips. Be aware of what you do. Be aware of how you sabotage your joy. And then contemplate these 4 questions this week. 1, am I willing to increase the amount of time every day that I feel good inside?
Yes.
Am I willing to increase the amount of time every day that I feel good inside? I'd rather feel good than bad. Second question to contemplate. Am I willing to increase the amount of time that my whole life goes well?
Yes.
Not just a part of it, the whole life. Am I willing to increase the amount of time that my whole life goes well?
Yes.
A couple of you are, good. And if you're not, that's certainly your thing. You can join the Catholics, where suffering is kind of a virtue. But we're the religious scientist, which says life is a party and we're here to have fun. Third, am I willing to feel good and have my life go well all the time? All. Notice that for some of you will bring a bunch of stuff up. Oh, that can't really happen. No, that's not possible. Yes, it is. You have access to the infinite. And you don't have to know how to make that happen. You just have to be willing. Are you willing? Are you willing to feel good and have your life go well all the time? And finally, you ready for this one? Am I willing to live at my ultimate level of success in love, money, and creative contribution? Some of you, that's a little tougher to do, isn't it? Am I willing to live at my ultimate level of success in love, money, and creative contribution? Take a breath. And notice, it didn't say you have to, it just said, am I willing to? If you find yourself in deep resistance, that's your thermostat pushing back on you. Okay? And so we'll just know that starts to clear away. Take a breath. I want to close with a quote from Helen Keller. And Helen Keller, for those of you who don't know, was blind and deaf, which is kind of not a really great way to go through life, in my opinion. Kind of hard to experience life. And yet this woman went through life powerfully. She did not let that hold her back. And she said, security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. I invite you this week to take on the daring adventure of life. I invite you to go for it. I invite you to sweep away all the stuff that has been holding you back. Get your, as Emerson calls, the bloated nothingness out of the way of the divine circuits and simply say yes to the divine. Yes to your infinite self. Yes. Let's take this into prayer. So I know that there is that one infinite presence. It is all there is. One life that is for itself because it can't be against itself because it would destroy itself if it did. And so it is for itself and it is for its individual expressions at which we are. Because we are one of that infinite. We are one of infinite love. Infinite love. We are one of infinite joy. We are one of deep, powerful, infinite peace. We are one of the infinite, powerful creativity of the universe that says, let there be, and there is. and it is good. We are one of the opulent, over-the-top good. In however many forms that takes, whatever form we choose it to take, we are part of that. We are one of that. It is individualized and expressing itself in, through, and as me, in, through, and as you, in, through, and as all of life. We are that. And so I speak my word that we become conscious of that to a greater extent than ever before. We become conscious of our connection with the infinite and how magnificent we truly are, more than ever before. That all the stuff that we've used to keep our temperature down, all the stuff we have used to hold back, we drop it. Like old socks into the laundry. We drop it out of our lives. We don't carry it anymore. We don't need that stuff. We let that go, and what we find when we let that go is the true, brilliant magnificence of who we truly are, radiating, expressing, being, and all we have to do is be willing to be that. When the light comes on in the room, the darkness is just taken care of. There's no fight, there's no struggle. And so we allow the brilliance of the light that we are to shine through into our lives, into every detail and aspects of our lives. We allow ourselves to feel that joy, that love, that happiness, to feel the natural state of our being, because that is who we truly are. And out of that, I simply say, thank you, God. I say thank you for the good that comes out of that. Thank you for the joy that comes out of that. Thank you for the peace and the harmony that comes out of that. Because as we operate in joy, as we operate in love, as we operate in our magnificence, we allow that to manifest around us, to spread like a contagion into the world around us. And so we transform the world around us and allow that to continue to ripple out. And so we create a world that is no longer working in darkness, that is no longer working from pain and suffering. We create a world that is working for joy, working from joy, working from love, working from harmony, working from enoughness, working from plenty. For this I am grateful. And so we turn this process over. We turn the how over into the infinite presence that knows exactly how to manifest it into form and experience right here, right now, and does so in our lives, each of us, right here, right now, individually, each person who watches this video, individually, right now. This magnificent law manifests itself, manifests the full good in our human form perfectly. And so it does, and so it is, and we say, and so it is.
Love you, David.